Somewhere on a remote cliff in the South Atlantic, a bird has spent the last 8 months completely alone, flying tens of thousands of kilometers over open ocean, never once touching land, never once seeing another member of its own species up close. No nest, no partner. Just wind and water for 8 straight months. Then, on almost the exact same week every year, something in it turns back toward a tiny island it has not seen since last breeding season. It lands on the exact same nest. It waits. On a new island, in the wild Falkland Islands, a researcher named Paolo Catri has been tracking black-browed albatross pairs for nearly 2 decades. Some pairs, he says, are still together. 16 years, 17 years. Same nest, same exact partner. Every single season. Albatrosses can live past 70. Most of that life is spent apart, alone, scattered across an ocean too vast to search. And yet, year after year, the same 2 birds find their way back to each other. On a rock in the middle of nowhere. At almost the same week on the calendar. So is that love? Or is it something that only looks exactly like love from the outside, built out of something else entirely underneath? It would be easy to stop right there and call it a day. Nature documentary voice, warm music, gentle strings swelling in. A story about lifelong devotion that practically writes itself. But that story skips the part that actually matters. Here is what is actually happening at the biological level. And the clearest answer science has does not come from birds at all. It comes from a small rodent barely anyone outside a lab has ever heard of. Roughly the size of a hamster. Unremarkable to look at. Easy to walk right past in a field without noticing. In the early 1990s, researcher Thomas Insel compared 2 nearly identical-looking rodents, ones most people would never tell apart on sight. The prairie vole forms an intense, lasting bond with a single mate almost immediately after they breed. Staying close, huddling together constantly, aggressively rejecting other potential mates that approach afterward, sometimes for the rest of its life. The montane vole, a close genetic cousin living in overlapping territory, does none of that. Mates. Moves on. No second glance. Same hormones circulating through both species, oxytocin and vasopressin. Same basic wiring on paper. But when Insel actually mapped exactly where the receptors for those 2 hormones sit inside each brain, the prairie vole had them packed densely into the nucleus accumbens, the same core reward circuit implicated in human addiction. The montane vole barely had any receptors there at all. Practically none. In other words, prairie voles are not simply more affectionate by temperament. Their brains are physically wired to treat one specific individual as a direct source of reward, running through the exact same neural pathway that lights up when a person becomes addicted to a substance. Neuroscientist Larry Young, who spent decades studying this exact system, later put it about as bluntly as a scientist can afford to. A pair-bonded vole's brain responds to its partner roughly the way an addict's brain responds to the sight of drug paraphernalia. The object itself becoming pleasurable purely through association. No conscious appreciation required at all. Just wiring doing exactly what wiring does. That is a strange thing to sit with, because it cuts both ways at once. On one hand, it means pair bonding is real, measurable, wired directly into reward circuitry, not some vague sentimental idea researchers invented afterward to make animal behavior sound nicer than it actually is. There is something concrete happening in that brain tissue, visible on a scan. Reproducible in a lab, over and over, in study after study. On the other hand, addiction is not usually what we mean when we say love. The comparison should make you a little uneasy. An addict does not choose their addiction out of some deep appreciation for who or what it actually is. The craving just exists. Whether or not it is good for them, whether or not it serves them in any larger sense at all. So when a prairie vole stays devoted to one partner for the rest of its short life, is that devotion? Or is it compulsion running quietly on autopilot, dressed up afterward in a story that sounds considerably better than the mechanism actually is? Which brings us back to the albatross. Because reality just ran an experiment, nobody actually designed on purpose, and the results complicate the fairy tale considerably more than the loyal bird headlines usually let on. In 2021, researcher Francesco Ventura and his team published data from over 15 years tracking those same New Island pairs. And they found something the loyal bird mythology does not really account for at all. Divorce happens. Not often. Only 1 to 8% of pairs in any given year. But critically, the rate is not random or fixed. It rises and falls directly with ocean temperature, year over year, almost like a dial someone else is turning from far away. In warmer years, when fish become scarce and foraging trips stretch longer and harder, divorce rates climb. Females whose eggs failed to hatch that season were roughly 5 times more likely to leave their partner the following year than females who had successfully raised a chick through to fledging. Even more telling, and considerably stranger, some females left partners after a genuinely successful season too. In years when the ocean itself had simply been unusually stressful, apparently misattributing the exhaustion of a brutal foraging season to their partner's performance specifically. Researchers now have an actual name for this pattern: the partner blaming hypothesis, and it captures something genuinely strange about how stress and blame get tangled together. A female's own stress hormones spike after an unusually hard foraging season, and something in her appears to misread that internal stress signal as evidence her partner is somehow at fault, even when the real cause was simply a warmer ocean holding fewer fish that year, something entirely outside either bird's control. So the bond is not unconditional after all, not even here, not even after 17 years. It resembles devotion remarkably well, right up until the exact moment it stops being useful. Then it can end quietly, without any visible drama, over a single bad season neither bird actually caused or could have prevented. Compare that to the 16-year pairs Catry still finds nesting together season after season on New Island, apparently unshaken by anything the ocean throws at them, weathering good years and bad years alike without ever splitting. And you get 2 versions of the exact same species behaving in almost opposite ways, depending entirely on how their particular year happened to go. So do animals really truly fall in love in any sense worth the word at all? The honest answer depends entirely on which exact moment you happen to be watching, and how far you are willing to zoom out to see the whole pattern. Catch a prairie vole early in a brand new pair bond, and you are watching something that looks a great deal like infatuation, wired straight into the same circuitry that makes a craving feel unbearable until the moment it is finally satisfied. Catch an albatross pair after 17 years of returning to the exact same clifftop nest, thousands of kilometers of empty ocean behind each of them every single time, and you are watching something that looks a great deal like commitment, the specific patient kind poets have spent centuries trying and mostly failing to describe accurately. And catch that same albatross the season directly after a failed egg, and you may instead be watching that very same bond quietly, almost mechanically, come apart for reasons that have nothing whatsoever to do with affection, memory, or loyalty. No affection, no memory, no loyalty. Just an ocean that ran too warm one year. Nobody currently studying any of this can tell you with confidence exactly where devotion ends and biology alone quietly takes over, or even whether that line was ever real to begin with, rather than something we invented afterward to make the science sit easier with us. Somewhere out over the vast open ocean right now, a bird is flying home toward the exact same partner it left 8 long months ago, for reasons it could never once explain to you, even if, somehow, impossibly, it could.